Hi everybody. So today's video, I wanted to cover a topic that I have not talked about as much on this channel, which is language learning. And in particular, I wanted to talk about Duolingo, which is obviously one of the most popular apps in the world for learning a language. But at the same time, it is also the app that I think gets the most criticism from language learners and polyglots and so on and whatever you want to call yourself. But the point is that it gets a lot of criticism, and I think that I wanted to bring in a criticism that I think has not been brought up before. I did a little bit of research. I couldn't find anyone really talking about this, and that is that Duolingo is really not a language learning app so much as it is a video game or a game that uses language as sort of the way of keeping you sticking around. So I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. Obviously, first of all, I want to preface this with the fact that I'm going to start off with some of my own experiences with Duolingo. And I, also simply want to explain, of course, that this is just my experience. Your experience may differ from mine. Obviously, the app has changed a lot in the last few years. And so parts of the experience that I've had with it are for, previous versions of the app that are not necessarily, reflective of the way that it works now. However, I am currently using it to relearn French, which I will talk about a bit more in a minute. And so I am still, an active user of Duolingo for all of the criticism that I level at it. So, keep that in mind, I guess. So to give you an idea sort of my language learning history, essentially, I started out like most American kids in school. I learned a little bit of French in high school. Most of it just fell out of my brain. I didn't really care about it. I just had to take the class, and it was the choice of either French or Spanish. So I chose French, and, I learned a bit, and I lost a lot of it, and, whatever. Then I went to university, and our university was really big on study abroad, and so as a result, I ended up, learning a bit more French in preparation to go on study abroad in France. Because that was basically sort of the only program that I could get into that, seemed like a good fit for me. And so I did a bit of studying, took a few more classes, sort of refreshed my French. And then I lived in France, in Strasbourg, for 6 months, lived with a host family, which I think was obviously sort of the time that I really got good at French, of course, because I was living in a country and, speaking the language and taking classes every single day. That's basically all I was doing. So, I learned, a decent amount of French, and I was able to, speak French pretty well. The problem, of course, was that after that, I didn't really maintain that at all. I've written a bit in my blog about this topic, about sort of how, in order to maintain a language, you need to continue practicing it. And I just didn't do that at all because I didn't really realize that I had to do that. I didn't really care too much. I just sort of thought of it as a good experience and, okay, let's move on. And I tried, maybe reading a couple books in French, but I didn't really do much of, any kind of dedicated practice. And so as a result, basically all of it fell out of my brain. It's been about 10 years since then. And I went through a few years where I didn't really care too much of, at all about learning languages. I tried using Memrise, which is another similar app to Duolingo, to learn a bit of Spanish. And that, I got a decent ways in, but I, ultimately just sort of, forgot about it. And that was really everything for a while until about 2016, which is basically when my wife got a job offer that moved us to Denmark. And so I went along with. And, I was like, okay, well, I'm going to be moving to Denmark. Why don't I start, trying to learn the language before we get there so that I can have some kind of head start and, maybe I can hit the ground running and, maybe take classes there or whatever. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. But I was like, okay, well, Duolingo offers Danish, so I will practice Danish on Duolingo, and that will prepare me for our move to Denmark. I spent about 3 to 4 months maybe learning Danish on Duolingo, and ultimately, that was a very sort of weird experience because I basically got the entirety of the way through the course that they offered, but there were sort of a lot of issues that I had with it. It wasn't a very long course. You could get through it again within just a few months. And I didn't feel any better at speaking or understanding the language than I did, when I started. I had a bit of understanding of vocabulary, but the amount of vocabulary that I studied in that course was limited. I had a bit of understanding of grammar and how to sort of put stuff together. But I didn't have any real formal, understanding of it. And probably the biggest problem with it was just that I hadn't done any real speaking or listening practice for Danish. Duolingo does include, obviously, the fact that the sentences are spoken out, as you're sort of, piecing them together. But, it's not really the same as, sitting down and, really following a conversation or, speaking. Danish is also a language that's just difficult to pronounce and also, difficult to understand sort of the connection between the pronunciation of the actual words and what you see written down until you have someone really guide you through understanding what vowels stand for what and so on. And so because there's a lot of sounds that you're not used to, and because I was, sort of listening along while I was doing Duolingo, but I wasn't having anybody really guide me through what meant what, it was like, okay, yeah, I recognize that word, but, I couldn't use that word in a conversation, period, because I simply didn't have any practice listening or speaking at all. I also found that the system had a really weird emphasis on repeating stuff that I had already learned, even when I didn't really feel that I needed to relearn it or practice it. There was a system in which basically words that you knew or lessons that you had completed would decay, and that meant that you had to repeatedly do them over time in order to keep them fresh. But the problem with this was that basically I would spend an hour a day just refreshing words that I had, basically just refreshed a few days ago. And so it was like, well, of course, I already know all this stuff. Why am I just constantly, doing this endless treadmill of repeating this over and over? When I should really be learning new vocab, where I should really be, doing a lot of other stuff. And ultimately, I don't feel like it really prepared me to do other stuff, like starting to actually read Danish or starting to actually listen to, Danish speakers. So I was really sort of stuck. I didn't really know what to do next. So a few months after our move, I completed that course, gave me a little bit of, rudimentary stuff that I could use when I'm, walking to the shop or whatever to get something. But, it clearly wasn't enough. So I found a local language learning school and I started taking classes there. I did intensive classes. At the time, I was working freelance, so I could sort of work whenever. And as a result, I had, plenty of time to sort of, move around in the day and to focus on those classes. So I did intensive Danish language classes there. And I would say that I learned a lot more in like the first month of that than I learned in the entirety of Duolingo. What I found was that essentially I had a very, very small leg up on some of the other people in the class who were starting from zero, who had like literally no experience. But it was a really, really small advantage, and it disappeared really quickly. By the time I got past, I would say, like the first month and a half of classes, we had basically entirely cruised past everything that Duolingo had ever taught me, and I was effectively, at the exact same place that everyone else was in. Which of course felt really frustrating when I had spent, maybe an hour or two a day doing Duolingo for months in preparation for all of this, hoping that it would give me some kind of edge. So since then, I do notice that a lot has changed with the app. Essentially, they've added a lot more depth to a lot of the courses. So, hopefully that solves the problem that I had where they just sort of ran out very quickly and, didn't have a lot of vocab. So hopefully, they do continue adding more vocab, and that means, that over time you're getting a lot more exposure to that. There are things where they sort of encourage you to speak or to listen to, different exercises so that you can get a little bit more of that practice in. But those exercises are actually optional. You can basically skip them if you don't feel like doing them. And so as a result, it feels a bit silly. Again, not great in terms of teaching those sort of really important skills. They also got rid of the whole decay mechanic where basically things need to be reviewed constantly in order to keep them fresh. Yes, there's still stuff that needs to be reviewed periodically, but you don't have to review it nearly as much. And as a result, it still feels good. Like, yeah, you do have to review stuff. Yeah, you have to sort of keep stuff in your memory, but it's not becoming this constant treadmill where you're constantly redoing old work for no reason when you already know it, pretty easily. So now I want to kind of put aside, my experiences with the app and sort of talk from the perspective of a game designer, which is, what I do in my daily, day job. So when you design mobile free-to-play apps, there's a certain way of looking at users of your app that, probably needs to be explained. So you have the process of acquiring users. You have to get users on your app somehow. You need to get, basically feet in the door, eyeballs on your app. You need to get people using it. And that can be all kinds of different ways to do it. There's basically App Store optimization, which is, of course, making your game look nice on the App Store. If you have a really, crap, posting on the App Store, then obviously people are going to be like, I don't know what this is. I'm not even going to bother clicking on it. But of course, if you've got it set up nice, grammatically correct, nice screenshots, you've got the right keywords in it so that people can find it with a search engine, that makes it a lot easier for users to find and use your app. There is, of course, stuff like word of mouth. Maybe, someone finds this app and they're like, oh, this is a really cool app, and they're going to tell their friend about it. Realistically, that's not usually a huge sort of driver of user acquisition unless you've got like a really cool app that's, for example, like Pokemon Go, where everyone's talking about it, everyone's, thinks it's really cool. It has a lot of sort of, popularity. Then there's things like social features in your game. So if your game has things like, okay, you've got a clan in Clash of Clans, and that means that you're playing with other people. And that also means that, if you've got like a buddy and you say like, hey man, like, why don't you join in on our clan and we can, play together. That again sort of helps get people into the door. Social features tend to, enable people to, sort of tell their friends about it and, to get rewarded for it a little bit. And as a result, they enjoy their experience more because they're getting rewarded and you're getting more users, and that's great for you. And then, of course, there's just plain old-fashioned marketing, ads. This is how, ads are kind of how most games get a lot of their users. But, it's still, it all depends. Every game is different. Some games are, more, based on marketing and advertising. Other games are more based on word of mouth. It all just depends on sort of who you are and, what your game is. It can be very different. So during the gameplay of your game, people will monetize, which is to say that they're going to make you money. And that can be things like spending money on some kind of boost or feature in the game that people, feel like spending money on. And it can also mean advertising. So you give the player the option to watch some ads. And then when they watch the ads, you get, a small amount back from the advertiser. And it really adds up when you have, say, thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of users using your app all at once and watching a lot of ads. So you give players the opportunity to watch ads, and of course you usually give them some kind of benefit or bonus in game for doing so. So long as they feel like, that watching the ad is worth their time in terms of what they get out of it in that bonus, then, they're going to watch those ads, and those ads are going to be offered to them, and that's going to be a good deal for everybody. Another important concept is retention. So retention is basically just how long someone sticks around in your game, how long someone is going to keep playing it. If you have a really bad game, then most people, maybe they'll install it and they'll look at it and they'll play it, once or twice, and then they'll just delete it or they just won't ever open it again. And that's pretty normal. In fact, basically we have the concept of day 1 retention, day 7 or maybe day 10 retention, and day 30 retention. And basically what those mean is simply that, how many people, what percentage of people that install the game stick around for the first day, stick around for 10 days, stick around for 30 days. And of course, you want those players to stick around for as long as possible. The longer they stick around, the more money they're making you, the more they're going to monetize, the more that they're going to spend, the more that they're going to watch ads, etc. And so that's, it's largely a result of good game design. You want to make a game that players like, that players enjoy, that they want to keep playing, and that, basically that they have plenty of goals and long-term things that they can work on that are going to make it, so that they want to continue playing the game over a long period of time. And so you want to design things in such a way that players enjoy the game and feel like they're getting their money's worth, they're getting their time's worth, and that it doesn't feel, like crap. So to bring this back around to Duolingo, how is Duolingo like a video game? Well, one major thing is that Duolingo now, since it's been changed, has like a hearts mechanic. And the way that hearts mechanic works is that you have 5 hearts, and anytime you make a mistake, you lose one of those hearts, and then you have to wait some time for those hearts to regenerate. And this is a really, really, really standard, normal sort of mechanic that exists in a lot of video games. It exists in games like Candy Crush. The idea is that you're sort of limiting the amount that the player can play the game artificially. You're sort of putting that artificial barrier in between, them and just playing all day, essentially. And that encourages them to do things like take a break and come back later, or maybe spend a bit of money to get more, hearts, or, whatever it is, it encourages players to not just play the game all at once and get bored because they're just doing a monotonous thing over and over again. And that's often a good thing, especially when we're talking about language learning. Language learning, it's a good thing when you're practicing in small chunks every single day, as opposed to just trying to do a lot at once and just burning out because you're like, oh, this is boring. I just spent 6 hours doing this and I'm not done yet. It's better to chunk tasks up into small amounts of play so that players really sort of have a much more sustainable approach to it. And so that's sort of a mechanic that tends to break up, gameplay sessions into sort of like nice, neat, digestible chunks. However, with Duolingo, it's kind of interesting because the hearts regenerate really slowly compared to, a lot of games that use sort of a heart or energy mechanic like this. A single mistake means that you lose a heart, and that means that maybe you have one lesson where something's not going right, you keep mistyping the same thing over and over again, you lose 3 or 4 hearts in one lesson. Or maybe, I've had lessons where I start off with 5 full hearts and I just keep making mistakes, and it's not, because I want to, obviously. It's just because maybe I'm a little bit rushed and I'm trying to type things in on my phone, and then, autocorrect keeps messing me up, or I keep accidentally typing in something just slightly wrong, and as a result, even, I could lose 5 hearts in a whole lesson and just immediately be out. And that sucks. It really sucks to have to do that, because it's not fun to, realize that you've failed. And of course, you can recover hearts by doing some review lessons, which, don't penalize you hearts if you mess up on them. So they're a good way to get an extra heart. And then they also offer you the option, after you've completed that review lesson, to watch an ad to get a second heart for that lesson. You'll also get offered an ad view to get a heart anytime you enter a lesson that is not a review lesson and you don't have full hearts. So if I have got 4 out of my 5 hearts and I try to start a lesson, it will say, hey, do you want to watch an ad to get another heart? And so you can start to see that this is a game that's heavily sort of weighted towards getting people to watch ads to recover those hearts. While sort of the review mechanic is sort of the main way that you're supposed to be ostensibly getting hearts, you can actually get more hearts from watching ads overall. And, it seems like sort of the main point of this is just to give you a reason to keep watching ads. You also see ads typically between every single lesson. They just pop you up an ad. Usually it's a shorter one, but they give you an ad regardless. So you're watching actually quite a few ads over the course of this game. And, I'll do Duolingo for maybe a half an hour to an hour a day, when I'm practicing, and I'll find that I've watched 10, 20, 30 ads, which is not actually very different from what you would expect to see in a mobile game. That's not, that's not unusual for many of these games. There are hyper-casual games, which are basically very heavily ad-driven, where you might watch an ad every minute or so, and those are sort of not a great experience for players, but they tend to make money simply because they force so many ads onto players. Whereas, a more, sort of sustainable game, okay, maybe you see a player watch 20 or 30 ads in one day in total. And so when I'm seeing myself watching 20 or 30 ads in Duolingo in an hour, I'm sitting here and I'm thinking to myself, this is kind of like a video game. And interestingly, a lot of the ads that I see in Duolingo are just ads for video games, of course, because the advertisers know who I am, they have my profile, and so they send me ads for video games. So, because I am used to playing so many mobile games, it's like, oh, hey, we know that you like mobile games, let's show you some other mobile game ads. So it's very silly because, very often I'll be playing a mobile game and I'll be getting ads for something, and then I'll go to Duolingo and I'll keep getting ads for the same thing, because it's basically the same advertisers at the end of the day, or because, it is what it is. And because the hearts mechanic feels so punishing, and because it's so easy to lose hearts, it feels very often when you use Duolingo for a while, like they're trying to slow you down, like they want you to have as slow of an experience as possible. They want you to be able to continue progressing, but they want to continually throw these little roadblocks in your way so that you can be slowed down, and that they can then offer you the opportunity to watch an ad to get a little bit, to get a little bit further along. And sort of their solution to this, of course, is the Duolingo ad-free subscription version. So if you pay it for a monthly subscription, then they remove a lot of these pain points. You no longer have to worry about hearts because they're basically entirely removed. And you can do things like take some tests and quizzes to sort of skip over sections a little bit faster, which is, very helpful because it saves you a lot of the sort of rote repetition that happens a lot. Nowadays, every single lesson has basically 5 levels, and in order to complete the lesson, you're supposed to get it to level 5. But the content of each level is not necessarily any different than the past one. So level 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 are basically the same. You're just doing the same thing 5 times over. And that's basically just designed, again, to sort of, keep you around, keep you continuing to practice, keep you looking over and reviewing the exact same stuff over and over again, so that they can continue showing you ads, and so that they can continue, maybe convincing you that you need to buy a subscription, and so on. These are examples of pain points. Pain points is basically a concept that means, when someone has maybe a rough experience because something is a little bit too difficult or because something is designed in a way that's a bit repetitive or boring. And sometimes these pain points are intentional, maybe because, the developer wants to then be able to step in and offer you some kind of way to skip those parts. And maybe they're unintentional in the sense that, maybe the developer just doesn't really know what they're doing and hasn't necessarily designed the game super well. In this case, with Duolingo, I think it's pretty clear that they've got a lot of money. They've had a lot of people working on this app for a very long time. And so I would say that it's very likely that most of these design decisions are intentional. They are introducing these pain points on purpose because they then want to be able to make you watch more ads or pay for the subscription. And that's kind of the main focus of the app because, again, that's how they make money and that's how they continue to sustain their business. And again, that is very similar to the way that mobile games are designed. Mobile games are designed to keep you sticking around. Mobile games are designed to keep you sort of busy and interested for long periods of time so that they can continue to offer you ad views, so that they can continue to offer you ways to spend money if you are interested. And of course, ideally, you live in a world in which the game is well designed and people feel like they always get their money's worth when they spend it, and they always feel like, the value of watching any given ad is worth it. But that's not always the case, unfortunately, and that's just sort of the way that the industry works. I also think that Duolingo in general doesn't seem to be very concerned with teaching people languages. So the founder of Duolingo has in the past stated that people who tend to cram in the app, trying to clear as much as possible all at once, tend to fail. And again, I agree with that. When you are learning a language, it is supposed to be a long-term process. It is supposed to be something where you are repeatedly practicing little bits over a long period of time, because that is just how your brain tends to remember things. That is just how it tends to be best to learn things and to acquire new skills. However, it's also really weird because there are gameplay features in Duolingo that seem to be designed to encourage cramming. So one of those is the leaderboards. Inside the game, there are leaderboards that rank you with a league based on other people who are in sort of a same level of activity as you. And you can sort of move up in these leagues as you beat the previous leagues or place highly enough. And so it's basically something like each week, the users in your league will all be compared to each other. The people who place in the top few places will be given rewards and move up to the next league. People who place, sort of in the middle places will just stay in the same league. And people who place very terribly will move down to a lower league. And so this is a mechanic that encourages people to cram. That's all there is to it. Competitive leaderboards like this are literally a mechanic that people put into video games as a way to encourage people to play more. When you put a leaderboard into a video game, that encourages competition. People are nuts for competition. I don't know how else to describe it. You put in some way that people can be competitive and they can see other players and they can try and compete with them, and they will feel that impulse to want to do more. That's really normal. That's just sort of a human part of the human psyche. And that impulse is something that we sort of take advantage of when you make a leaderboard. A leaderboard is designed that, okay, because you want to beat these other people on the leaderboard who you perceive as, challenging you, you are going to spend more. You are going to, engage more. You're going to play the game more. In Duolingo's case, you're going to try and cram more. And that's a good thing when you are trying to, get people to watch a lot of ads or to use a lot of Duolingo. But it's not necessarily how it's supposed to work when you're supposed to be, again, trying to learn a language, slowly and methodically over a long period of time. If it was really sort of dedicated to encouraging players to, just do a little bit, over and over a long period of time, then Duolingo has a lot of weird, choices that are clearly not designed to support that. I also couldn't find the interview, but maybe this is just something that I've invented in my brain, but I seem to remember, some time back, someone else talking about how, the founder of Duolingo had said that the app itself is not designed to get people to fluency alone. You're expected to do, other stuff like, again, reading, like listening, like speaking. And that's just stuff that Duolingo doesn't really offer in a satisfactory way. I think that what Duolingo tends to offer you is a lot of practice for grammar rules and maybe a little bit of practice for vocabulary, but it doesn't tend to offer you all these other skills that are an important part of learning any language. And so it kind of, I don't know if that's true or not that he said that, but it sort of gives, it's kind of like telling on yourself. It kind of, gives you an idea of, if you're saying that the app isn't really designed to teach people languages or it isn't really designed to get people fluent, then what is it for? In Duolingo, there's this huge emphasis placed on practice, and practice is basically just repeating the same stuff over and over again. You're not necessarily learning new things. Very often a new lesson is basically just, okay, you've got 5 new vocabulary words, and then you're going to go back to repeating the exact same sentence construction, grammar, sort of exercises that you've been doing all along. And so, I might, have a section that's like, oh, this section is about school. And then it's really, the reality is that I'm just conjugating the same verbs over and over again. But now it's like, got some school adjectives slapped onto it, instead of, really significantly changing sort of what I'm doing in each lesson. I'm just repeating the same stuff over and over again. There's just sort of, swapping out some of the words. And again, the amount of vocab that you ultimately learn from this is very limited compared to what you can learn just literally, reading a book. A good example is that I use another app, Link, which makes it really easy to do assisted reading for languages. And, I've been using Link for French, and I've been using Duolingo for French for the exact same period of time, relearning my French. And, in Duolingo, I would say I've spent a crap ton of time just reconjugating the exact same verbs. And in Link, I've got, maybe 6,000, 7,000 total words that I've learned in the same period of time. And then, of course, I've been able to make flashcards out of those words and practice them. And the end result is that I'm learning a lot more vocabulary than I literally ever even knew when I lived in France. I'm learning a lot more stuff that I just never knew before, simply because I'm doing some actual French reading. I'm actually reading through a bunch of sentences in French. Another problem that I have with Duolingo is simply that a lot of it gets really, really frustrating and boring because tiny little errors can lead to, again, like I mentioned before, you lost a bunch of hearts and now you have to start the lesson over. When you're repeating the same stuff 10 times in a row to, get it mastered, and you're basically getting to a point where, you're like really frustrated because you've been doing the same thing over and over again, and you know exactly what you're supposed to be putting in there. You know what the words are, you know how to say them, but then, you mess something up on your phone's autocorrect, or you type something slightly wrong, or you miss a single adjective in the sentence and don't translate it. It's like, well, yeah, you basically understood the whole sentence, and you basically, didn't need to, prove to your phone that you understood it in order to, get it right. And so it's really frustrating when often you sort of already know this stuff, you don't know why you have to keep repeating this stuff, and little dumb things like spelling or phone autocorrect are messing you up and causing you to fail and lose progress. Sometimes Duolingo is also just flat out wrong or misleading in their translations. This is something that's actually driven me up a wall. As someone who, has learned French in the past and is now relearning French, I spot a lot of these issues really easily. I've been using the app for, about 3-4 months now, and I constantly run into these problems where they will just literally not accept a correct translation for a sentence. So, an example is that the word professeur in French, which means teacher, is also often shortened to prof, which just means teacher. And Duolingo knows this. They know this. And sometimes they will just decide that they want professeur, and sometimes they want prof, and they won't tell you which. So they'll say the sentence, translate the teacher eats an apple or whatever in Duolingo, and you can say, okay, the prof eats the apple, and they will say, incorrect, we wanted you to say professeur in this sentence. No idea why. There are also other things like the words étudier, which means to study, and apprendre, which means to learn, but could also mean to study, or, something along those lines. And so they'll say the sentence, hey, he is studying his French lessons. And again, you would think that étudier would be the, more commonly accepted word in this sentence, but they will get mad at you because in this specific instance, they wanted apprendre. And there are plenty of times where they will switch those back and forth, where, sometimes, they want étudier, and sometimes they want apprendre, and they will not tell you which. And it's really, really frustrating because, yes, sometimes contextually, in a very specific lesson, they have a very specific set of vocab. And so it's like, okay, well, in this lesson, we're only using prof, and in this lesson, we're only using professeur. But again, it's really frustrating because you have produced a correct translation for the sentence that they want, and they are not accepting it simply because they wanted you to give a slightly different translation for that sentence, which is really mind-bogglingly frustrating. There are also plenty of instances in French, for example, where a verb can be conjugated in different ways, but be pronounced the same. And so if you were having a conversation with a French speaker on the street, you could theoretically mess up the conjugation and they would still understand you because you still pronounce it the same way, and so they don't care. And so it's really frustrating in French in particular when Duolingo will be like, oh, hey, you messed up this conjugation very slightly, and as a result, you have gotten this sentence wrong. And it's like, well, yes, this matters if you are writing French and if you are, writing an essay or something like that. But it's not going to be a problem if you are, say, comprehending or reading French, because you can hear it just fine. You can understand the base word just fine if you look at it in a book. But if you try and conjugate it in a written form, that is the only time where you can really get that wrong. And so that's another frustrating thing, simply because it's a language that doesn't, it's like I've spoken with French speakers. They don't care about that stuff a lot of the time as long as they can understand you. And that is another super frustrating little tiny nitpicky point. Another problem is that the primary method that Duolingo uses to teach people how to, speak or learn a new language is by translating things back and forth between English or, whatever your current language is and whatever your target language is. And that's actually not a very good way to learn to speak or write a language, because that's not the way that people think when they think in a language. What happens is that as you get a certain level of competency in the language, you think in that language. You are not thinking in English when you are reading French. You are thinking in French, and you are trying to sort of connect the words in a French sentence together in a way that makes sense in French. You are not necessarily trying to translate things. And if you are in this state of constantly saying, oh, this word means this in English, that slows things down to the point where you're not accomplishing anything. If you are having a conversation with a French speaker, you are learning to converse with them in French. You are not learning to have them speak French to you. You translate it into English, you translate a thought in English back into French, and then you speak to them. That is a process that is way too slow and is not naturally how our brains tend to do that. So it's really frustrating when you're constantly being asked to just translate stuff back and forth when you could just be off, reading a French book or listening to, some French radio or something like that, and getting the whole thing in French and focusing on developing that skill of connecting those meanings together in French and being able to respond mentally in French, which is how things happen when you become actually fluent or when you gain a certain level of competency enough that you can actually think in that language. Good language learning tends to rely on a few key aspects. You need to rely on immersion in the language. You need to use the language as much as possible. The more the better. Really awesome if you can live in a foreign country where that language is spoken and just be constantly exposed to those speakers, because that way you are forced to learn it, you are forced to use it, you are forced to practice it all the time. There's also, of course, just long-term practice, just sticking with it, practicing a little bit every day, not trying to cram things, not trying to push a bunch of stuff all at once, because your brain does not work like that. Your brain works best when you have lots of long-term repetition, and that's how you really develop any skill, whether it's language, whether it's fitness, whether it's any kind of knowledge base that you want to build. In general, grammar is important. It's useful, and that is a thing that Duolingo teaches, but that's a small fragment of like the entirety of a language, of which, the things that tend people to trip people up a lot more are vocabulary. If a language speaker uses an uncommon word and you immediately don't know the context of the entire sentence, then that's hard. And that matters oftentimes a lot more than knowing how to conjugate something exactly right in order to, ensure that you've gotten things grammatically correct. It's important, essentially, to learn how to speak piss-poor French with bad grammar quickly, and then start building your vocabulary and then building up your grammar over time as you sort of get better at it, than it is to worry about perfecting your grammar first and not touching any vocabulary for a long period of time, and then, trying to sort of reverse engineer that later. It sucks. It's not fun. It's not good. So Duolingo doesn't really address a lot of these problems. Duolingo isn't really designed to encourage people to do a lot of listening, to do a lot of speaking, to do a lot of reading. It is just designed to get people to translate individual sentences back and forth, and it penalizes you very heavily for any mistake. And it just seems to be designed in such a way that you will want to continue watching ads, continue sticking around with Duolingo forever, and just continuing to use the app. I would bet that Duolingo has really good retention compared to your standard video game, because a lot of these people, maybe want to learn a language, not just, because they want to play a game or have fun, but because, they really genuinely want to learn a new language or get exposed to, something new, whether it's for a professional reason or a personal reason, personal goal, or whatever. The reality is that Duolingo does seem to be designed like a video game, and it does seem to be designed to waste a lot of your time and to sort of hold you back. That said, again, I do think that Duolingo has some value. I am using it to learn French, in large part because I need a lot of practice for the grammar rules, because again, French is a language where lots of conjugation and grammar stuff is difficult, and there's a lot of different tenses and so on. However, I'm very frustrated because I have been using the app for like 3 or 4 months straight, and it has basically taught me the present, the simple future, and the passé composé. It has not taught me any of the other tenses, which is what I actually need practice with. And it's kind of frustrating because it's like, come on, I know all this stuff. Why am I doing all this really slow practice over and over again when I really just want to get to the stuff where you show me, the other tenses that I don't know yet? It's really silly. So, amusingly, to sort of round out this video, I was doing a little bit of research when I started this video, right? Where I was like, hey, has anyone really talked about how Duolingo is more like a game that's, trying to, get you to watch a lot of ads than it is really a language learning tool? And, of course, I searched Duolingo video game in YouTube, and I did not discover any people with this particular perspective on things. What I did discover, however, is a lot of people treating Duolingo like a video game. So I found people who are streaming Duolingo on Twitch and then, making YouTube videos out of that. I found people doing hardcore runs, which, brings you back to your Diablo 2 days. The concept of a hardcore run in Diablo 2 was that, whenever you die, you don't get to respawn. So your character only gets 1 life and that's it. And I see people doing hardcore speed runs of Duolingo where they try and get as far as possible, as fast as possible without making a single mistake. I see people doing just general speed runs where they're trying to hit a particular milestone within the app, within a specific language as quickly as possible. There's a certain level where you are gamifying a language learning process, and then there's a certain level where it just crosses the line a little bit and it becomes a video game with a little bit of language sprinkled on top, so that people are having fun. And I think that unfortunately sometimes Duolingo falls into the latter category. In general, I will probably do another whole video about sort of my language learning process and the tools that I recommend. Obviously, that's a whole other topic. So I think that is where I'm going to finish it up today. As always, if you liked the video, comment, subscribe, tell me what you want to see in future videos, give me some ideas, and send me some hate mail, whatever it is that you want to do. And I will talk to you all next time. Have a good one.